Hey everyone, we're at West Coast Muscle Saws. I'm going to continue on that carburetor repair. I did a little research in between the videos there, and what I found was this gasket, a small membrane gasket right here, was leaking. And what I did was use a little bit of a soapy liquid here, done some testing, and it's bleeding right there. Took it off. The gasket previously had been wrinkled just a little bit. Strained it out. We're getting a good solid reading now. I need to zoom you back in here because I've got some critical information I want to show you here on this repair, and it's just important information to pass on. Sorry about the little blurb. When you go live, you just never know what's going to happen next. Okay. What we were talking about is how to test the high-speed, low-speed jets. And we're going to put this bag on. You want to, after you put the inlet needle in, there's a couple little bosses on this one. And there's a special little tool that Walboro makes, or you can make your own little tool, just a little flat piece of metal. And you want to make sure this is setting flush across those bosses. Same on the Tillotsons. You don't have the bosses, but you want this metering level across. If it's too high or too low, you'll get some erratic running. It's not sensing when to give it the fuel, and so you'll have a flooding or a lean issue, and it can just all be associated with that inlet metering lever right here. Always check these if you're using the old one. Make sure you don't have any wear on the little boss right here. Make sure it's in good shape. Hold it up to the light. Make sure there's no holes. Of course, we're going to test this. We can tell by doing some testing whether it's leaking or not. Make sure it hooks. Put the cover back on. Always have a few of these screws from old carburetors around because it never happens. One hits the floor and it takes off like a rocket underneath your bench and it's gone. You spend half an hour looking for it. You can do this type of testing on the newer carburetors. They've got the Intel carburetors now and the different ones. If you've worked on the Homelite 650s, 750s, 350s, 360s, you'll notice a little metal tube connecting to this atmospheric little dimple right here going to above the air cleaner. That's so when the air cleaner gets plugged, carburetor atmospheric pressure is not changing because of the plugging of the air filter. You want the atmospheric pressure to be what is actually outside or around the chainsaw. I'm going to close that door one more time. We're still getting some guys out here working. We're going to open up the high speed and low speed one turn each, which is pretty standard on these Tillotson Walboro carburetors for this vintage 70s, early 80s. Going to pump this up, make sure it holds. It's telling you that you've got some sealage all the way around the fuel pump side and also around the metering side. Everything's looking good so far. That's your first test after you've cleaned it with a sonic cleaner. Put your kit in there. You probably should go with a OEM kit. I mean, as far as Tillotson, Walboro, Zama, whatever the carburetor is. Reason being is they change the material to adjust to the alcohol in the fuel so it doesn't deteriorate those diaphragms. It will deteriorate the diaphragms, and they've come up with a good mixture for the material. Pump it up, watch the gauge. A little probe, you can use a little probe here, just be gentle, don't poke any holes over the flat of your little adjuster screwdriver. And you're going to watch that gauge. Bleeds right off. That's good. If it were to bleed off slow, that would tell you you've got a restriction. So what we're going to do next is to take them both back in gently. You don't want to force these, just gently snug. And of course these jets are different. You don't want to take them out, crisscross them, get them in the wrong hole. You can booger up a good carburetor. Mark them if you're going to do it with a little mark pen. Little red dot here and a red dot on one of them so you know where they go. Pump it up again. Should seal. Feel a little resistance on your screwdriver or whatever you're touching this with. You'll feel a little resistance. Perfect. Everything's sealing. You're just about home free. That's also telling you that these soft plugs are sealed. These older saws, they used a sealer. For years they used fingernail polish, but with the advent of the alcohol, it would actually eat that up, so now they've got a little better sealer. Truthfully, if you get the soft plug in right, gently seating it, do the test, you're probably fine. If you want to put a little sealer, be careful what you get. Make sure it's resistance to gasoline or alcohol. Of course, that's what you take fingernail polish off with, is alcohol. So if you were to use the old way, you'd run into problems. Okay, what you're going to do next is to go ahead and bleed this off. You're going to turn out the low speed, a full turn. That's pretty much standard settings. That's where it should run. You may have to fine tune it afterwards. You're going to pump it back up. Get a good reading. It should bleed off fairly fast, telling you that the low speed metering system is working. Bleeds right off. That's good. If it was a slow bleed off, you'd have a restriction in there, and of course that would lead to a stumble. When you throttle it up, that would stumble and die. In transition, going from the low circuit, medium circuit to the high-speed nozzle, you would have a stuttering. It would just kind of die out until you hit the wide open throttle, WOT, and then it would take over and you'd be running mostly wide open throttle, not so much on the low-speed circuit. Make sense? Okay, you're going to take in the low speed and then turn out the high speed, full turn, same way. Pump it up. Same thing, it should bleed right off. And it does. Walboro has a very hard to replace membrane on the wide open throttle. It's not a nozzle, I call it a nozzle. It's not a nozzle, it's actually cast into the venturi. You might be able to see it in there, a little bump in there. And that creates the low pressure that it needs to do the venturi effect. It's not replaceable, other than you can replace this membrane, but it takes a special tool kit. I don't have one here to show you today, but I got it in my other toolbox. But it's a little tool kit that you can actually pop out the little circle clip. It's a very minute one, and you can replace it. I've done it, but you want to have some good lights. Get you some good glasses, those that you can actually see in there real good, because it's very delicate in there. You got to be very careful, but it is repairable. And then knowing that those are good, testing all that, and testing the way we did everything with a new kit, this should run, and you shouldn't have any issues. If you ran into the issues of the soft plugs, you really want to, like we talked about in the other video, sonic clean it, but don't do it very long. Sonic is very hard on carburetors. 5-10 minutes warm with your soapy mixture, that's adequate. Those passages you just can't clean with your little probes and pipe cleaners and everything else. It's very difficult. And hopefully that explains that to you. I'm sorry about that blurb in our previous video. It happens. Not much I can do about that. It just showed up. So anyway, if you've got any questions, you can email or get a hold of Chainsaw Guy if you got like some other. Oh, I want to show you a couple of tools that you do need while we're here. Special tools. This, of course, is a really nice needle. On the inlet needle, if you were to take out that metering needle, and then the inlet needle, we call it, there was a fix for those. You know, they get pitted. Moisture, alcohol, whatever, use, debris in the carburetor, all kinds of things associated to it. Just be careful taking this apart. There's a little spring underneath here. There's the spring. If you take your otoscope, get you an otoscope, and you can get those online. Get a pretty good quality one. They're not expensive. Same thing, the doctor looks into your ear when you go to the doctor. And you can stick that otoscope in this opening right here. And you should do that with a good known carburetor and then a carburetor that's you're working on so you can get a feel for what you're looking for. You'll see a little bit of pitting in there with the otoscope. It's a magnifier. Your otoscope's a magnifier so you can look in there. It was an issue back in the 70s and 80s, and the Walboro came out with this tool, which you'll never find again. If you're familiar working on hydraulics, you understand how to seat a check ball on hydraulics. I was taught at a hydraulic school that I went to work on the timber jacks, and when they start bleeding off, you take a drift and a hard ball bearing and you drop it in there and you just give it a wrap, turn it, give it a wrap, and you've created a new seat because you're dealing with aluminum. Same idea on this. If you can get up, see it goes there. Looks like an inlet needle. If you look at them. Greatest tool they ever come out with for fixing these, because that was one of the main things that goes wrong with these, is you will hear, and I had a customer contact me the other day, and he may be watching, maybe not. Run his saw, shut it off, and would hear this noise coming out of the carburetor, kind of a boiling noise, a high frequency noise. What it is this needle seat might seal under normal pressure, but you get the saw hot, you got extra pressure against the fuel, and the saw is wanting to vapor lock anyway. This will let it weep by, go into the manifold, and it's actually dripping on the hot piston, and that's where you hear that noise. And that makes the hard start on a warm chainsaw when this isn't sealing properly. You would replace this, it might work good for 2 or 3 days, and then all of a sudden you get the same thing. And what it is, the seat is damaged. What you would do with this tool is you would gently line it up in there, and then you would gently bump, test it, turn it. Just like I said, it's not a hard hit. You're not banging on steel. Bump it. Get a new inlet needle, put it in there, run some tests on it, and you won't know for a couple of days if you cured it completely, but this tool worked wonders. And I suppose you could build one, but it's got to be the perfect pitch where you can do more damage than good. I'd like to check on some of these manufacturers making these different saw parts, see if they could produce a bunch of these for you guys, because you can save a lot of these carburetors you can't get anymore, and you're wanting to restore your classic saw, and this tool would get your saw inlet seat fixed. Might run for years. A couple other tools that I've used over the years, just a quick rundown here. Of course, we talked about the pressure vacuum gauges, very popular. Nose pliers. Never guess what we use those for. You can have some of these old boots that are just in rough shape. You can use these nose pliers, lubricate them a little bit, put it in there. If you're putting this wire in here, you can spread that, or spread it from this end, pop that spring in there with a little lubricant, done. Takes a few seconds, otherwise you're fighting it, and guys are wondering how you were able to always ask me how could you fix those so quick. Well, pair of nose pliers works wonders. Over the years, of course, you use a lot of these. These are piston stops. Of course, you have to be very careful. You can do more damage than good. This was always a great tool for testing. I always get guys saying they don't have fire on the chainsaw. And I've always said, well, you hold that wire while I pull on it, and we'll see how far you come off the ground. What's happening is those cylinders are covered with zinc, and you're not getting a good ground, and if you're just laying a spark plug on it, you may not see any fire, but if you'll hook this up, you can buy these without the wire on it. Make you a little harness. Take this plug out, aim it away from you, because you could have some fuel in that cylinder and you could ignite, shoot a nice flame out. I've done it. laid anywhere, it doesn't matter where you lay it. Hook this up to a good ground, plug it into the cap off the chainsaw, or whatever you're working on. It works on small engines too. Scrape this with the alligator clips onto a good ground, spin it over. Basically the cheapest, quickest way to check fire. You can do your ohm readings all day long and do all kinds of things and scratch your head. Almost all the modules anymore either have fire or they don't. It's not a matter of, is it this transistor in here, what are we dealing with? Mostly it's module, this wire in the boot, and you can check that by just gently pulling. You don't want to pull hard, just gently pull, or where it connects onto the, this is just a tester, where it connects onto the coil module. And check for brakes or your ground wire stop switch not functioning properly. These tools are just great. Of course, you got to use piano wire. That's the trick, is the piano wire. And the main trick too is that when you build this, it just looks like this. Then you give it a little extra kink, and that's what holds the hose as you're popping it through your home light 650s, 750s, weed eaters, anything. You can put a fuel line in one of those hard to do weed eaters in seconds with one of these. Just a great tool. I used to build them, I don't anymore, but guys can do it. Tachometers, I got all kinds of flavors, everything you can imagine. Everything's different if you're working on many different saws. Steel, Husqvarna. I was also, when I was in the saw business, I had three benches set up, all with these tools, so I could be working on one saw and customer come in and get in the middle of a project, needs a quick fix. You could go this table bench to the next bench and get them out of there. You don't see these anymore. That's the tool for taking the fire screen out of a Husqvarna 2100. It's got the lip on it there where you can reach in there and take it out. Little snap centering tool. Just push on it, it snaps. Center punch. It's just a great tool. And that's all I'll show you today. There's more tools. If you got any questions, you got anything you're working on, you got something you'd like me to talk about, give me a shout. All right, guys, have a good one.